Hey everyone, it's Blake, and welcome in to today's episode of the 411 on Wrestling Podcast. On today's episode of the podcast, we welcome in Andy Perez, who is the host of the new Dissecting Dynamite post-show on 411 Mania, and it's going to be on 411's YouTube channel each and every Wednesday night, right after Dynamite, and the debut edition will start this Wednesday after the one-year anniversary edition of Dynamite. I'm going to join Andy on the first episode and talk about what we saw from the anniversary show for AEW Dynamite, and that's exactly what we talked about in this podcast. We went through and talked about some of our favorite moments from 1 year of AEW Dynamite and everything AEW has been able to accomplish along the way. We went into a lot of different topics, looking at who's been the MVP for AEW in this past year of weekly television. We talked about the different divisions, the tag team division, the women's division, all the different things that are going on in AEW, what we've seen from a lot of these talents along the way, what are some things we'd like to see a year from now, and we even made some fun predictions a little bit later on. Who do we think is going to be the AEW World Champion once we have our 2-year AEW Dynamite anniversary? We talked about a lot of different things. We mentioned a lot of different wrestlers. This conversation was really in-depth in terms of if you're someone who has followed this journey for AEW over this past year of having a television show each and every week on TNT. We talked a lot about it, and we brought up some things that you may have actually forgotten about because, as we mentioned many times, it's not easy to remember everything when you're talking about a weekly television show, but there have been a lot of highlights for AEW over the past year, and we tried to discuss as many of them as we could, as well as some of the things that maybe have not worked as well for AEW and some of the things that they can improve on here as they move forward with AEW Dynamite. So sit back and enjoy this conversation with Dissecting Dynamite host Andy Perez. All right, as promised, our guest today is Andy Perez, and as I mentioned in the intro, Andy is going to be hosting a brand new Dissecting Dynamite show on the 411 YouTube channel. We're going to be doing that after Dynamite each and every Wednesday night. And Andy, I appreciate you doing this, man. We're excited to get this Dissecting Dynamite going, and of course, you and I today, we're going to discuss basically AEW Dynamite 1 year now. It's hard to believe it's been going that long, isn't it?
Oh my gosh, and it has been a wild and crazy year at that. I'm excited to break it down.
It's going to be fun, and as we said, we'll give more details on the Dissecting Dynamite show later on when we wrap up our conversation. But for now, I mean, you know, it's interesting to think back. Like we said, it has been a year, and it's something where, you know, I think the expectations for AEW going in, a lot of people were unknown. They didn't know exactly what to expect. I think probably you and I included on that in terms of, you know, we knew what the roster looked like. We knew what had been assembled, but, you know, I think it's just one of those things where from a viewership standpoint, from an audience standpoint, you never really know until you launch that show. And although we had seen, you know, previous shows, pay-per-view type events, we didn't know exactly what things were going to look like from a weekly television standpoint. And so it's pretty fascinating to think back to how things first started. And of course, you had NXT making the switch to go head-to-head. And it's crazy, man, to think back to kind of how far AEW has come in this 1 year time.
Yeah, you're looking a year back and you see the Young Bucks, you see Kenny Omega, you see Cody coming together to make this amazing wrestling company with Tony Khan, and I feel like the big pun intended explosion happened when Chris Jericho was announced as being part of the roster.
You know, of course, we just came off the 30-year Jericho thing, and that was obviously a fun show, but I mean, I don't think you can say enough, and one of the things I was thinking about today, actually, is, you know, a lot of people are talking about, you know, what are your favorite memories, and we'll actually discuss some of those in a bit, but, you know, to me, like, who's the MVP of this entire, you know, Dynamite 1 year run here? I mean, there have been a lot of great, I mean, Moxley's champ, I get that, and we'll talk about him in a minute, but I just don't think anyone else has stood out to me like Jericho, and I know it's just one of those things where he's been such a big part of what they've done, and you know that's obviously part of that's the inner circle. I mean, it's a group that is pretty much still, I think at this point, kind of at that top tier. Like you haven't really seen them slide back, and as Jericho's mentioned many times, you know they haven't been one to where every week or every other week they're teasing a breakup or something like this, like we tend to see with a lot of factions over the years.
No,
It's
they are
just
tight knit. They are a
exactly
tight
like
knit group.
they are so tight knit, and I think just his involvement in that has really been, to me, the highlight. Of course, we know all the feuds he's had along the way with Orange Cassidy, of course, losing the title to Moxley, and just everything he's done. It just seems like he just keeps reinventing himself, and he has, to me, been kind of that highlight of this entire 1 year run for Dynamite.
And that's exactly it. No, everybody expects Chris Jericho to innovate and reinvent himself, but him being able to do that, in addition to elevating the talent around him and the way that he has, bringing Jake Hager, up, Sammy Guevara, everybody in the inner circle has gotten better because of their association with Chris Jericho. And like you were talking about with his laundry list of opponents that he has also brought up, the Orange Cassidys, his matches with Darby Allin, making Darby Allin look like a star, singles matches with Jungle Boy that make Jungle Boy look like the future of the company. It's undeniable the importance of Jericho and the inner circle to AEW success this first year.
Yeah, they've been fantastic, and I know you just kind of course, I think the biggest moment for them obviously was the Stadium Stampede match, and of course that's not Dynamite specific, but still though, I mean that's just that has been such a huge part though, because we can remember them kind of hyping up the match itself, and then afterwards, I still laugh because it's funny. The other day, I guess AEW's having their big fall sale or something on their online shop and such, and I picked out a couple things to buy, and I was like, all right, I'm going to buy this and that. Of course, you still see the Stadium Stampede shirt on there that's still half price. It's still $12.50 off the regular $24.99, and I just crack up every time I see that. I still haven't bought it yet, but at some point I'm going to be like, all right, when I'm going to get my next order, and I'm going to end up buying this shirt.
I was just about to bring that up because I also had my eyes on a certain Shop AEW fall sale, and I may have copped one of the Stadium Stampede Inner Circle shirts in the meantime. So at least one of us took advantage of it,
Well, I hope to be seeing you wearing that on the Dissecting Dynamite show, because I'll have to bring my gear as well when I come on the show with you, because
sounds like a plan.
I went on quite a spree for this one, and I had to get my Dark Order shirt too. John Silver, Alex Reynolds, my goodness, John Silver. Everybody knows I love this guy, but we can talk more about him when we do our I guess we'll do our Being the Elite yearly anniversary show at some point, and John Silver will be the star on that one. But speaking of Jericho, one of the things I think about with Jericho too is the pandemic when it first started. Of course, that's when AEW is, like many other people, like many other companies, having to adjust on the fly. And I just remember back watching those shows that they were doing. And of course, they decided, almost like one of those decisions where they had to do it. Like they didn't have a choice. And Jericho's brought this up many times where they basically said, hey, we need you on commentary. Like, we need you doing this and we need you doing that, because, of course, they didn't have their full roster at the time. They were basically trying to just come up with different things and tape as many shows as they could at the same time, not knowing what things could look like week to week. And, of course, Jericho's on commentary for all those. And obviously he was hilarious on everything with that. But, that brings up something else, too, though. I was thinking, Andy, is that to me, and we can talk about some of the talents that kind of stood out during that first part of this era, but I thought Jericho too was so fantastic in sort of making some of these younger talents during that. And we, Pineapple Pete, and we can remember all those lines and everything, but
exactly,
like he was just so great. And that's another way I think that he's done that. It hasn't just been his character in the ring, anything like that. Even during the stretches on commentary, he finds a way to kind of put these people over, and I thought that's been another highlight.
Oh, most definitely. And talk about a jack of all trades, or I guess a Jericho of all trades. You have an author, you have a wrestler, you have a rock star, and you have a commentator that can go one-on-one with Jim Ross and perhaps even best him in the commentary booth nowadays. I mean, he has just been, like you said, putting every single star over that he comes across or that he even mentions. And that carries into his recent interactions with MJF, which I have just been savoring. Not only comedy gold, but you can tell that they're building to something that that will surely be great with the talents of MJF and Chris Jericho at hand. You know what I mean?
And that's the thing too. Like MJF's been one of those. I think when we look at just the overall picture of guys that, when AEW first started, I mean, MJF was someone that everybody knew. Like he was on that upswing. Like everybody understood that this was a guy, obviously on the mic, that is unlike many others. I mean, he had a character that had worked before AEW, but then I think it was a matter of, okay, to what point are they going to let him dial it to in terms of how far can they take this upward? And we've seen that, like for him especially, and we obviously saw him get a title match recently, against Moxley, and I think you've just seen this guy. He's undoubtedly been one of the stars, I think, of this last year run, especially since they've been on television week to week. He's just been someone that has really stood out. And I think you can throw a lot of people in that category. You can put MJF in there. You can look at, obviously, Hangman Page has been someone that has seen kind of the evolution of his character. We mentioned Jungle Boy earlier, like Sammy Guevara, like even Britt Baker, I think is someone that you think about where Britt Baker was on that very first episode of Dynamite, where I think she was on commentary for that first episode, and like she's playing a completely different character, and now she's just like the complete opposite at this point.
And talk about those stars that have really stood out during the pandemic era. Even though she hasn't been competing in ring during a large portion of this era, she has really made her character shine in these backstage skits. The way she carries herself when she's outside of the ring with the other talent as well. She has really stood out to me, and I feel like she's really going to get her time to shine in the women's division going forward.
Yeah, I think so too. She's you look at how far she's come in this 1 year span, and to think too, and I think that's something about AEW. I don't know what it is, but they just find ways to put these younger talents, I guess, in spots to where they're usually either working with someone that is going to be able to kind of bring out those little things to kind of help push them forward, or it's just putting them in the right spots or the right stories, and I feel like they do such a good job with that. And one of the things I've always thought about is, and this is not going to turn into me bashing WWE or anything like that, but obviously WWE is what people compare AEW to because they are the big two for everyone in terms of where things are at in North America right now. I think, Andy, when I think about it, the difference to me is when I watch WWE on a weekly basis in terms of, obviously all the television they have each week, for Raw and SmackDown, and maybe it's gotten better a bit, I think, on SmackDown when you look at stuff with Roman Reigns and obviously
Right.
the Bayley-Sasha thing and all that. Like, I think they've done a really good job with those specific things, but it seems like because of the amount of hours that they have, there are so many things on the show that don't necessarily lead to anything. And I think with AEW, that tight 2 hours every single week, like I feel like pretty much everything they do, and I'm sure you could point out examples along the way, maybe things that just didn't go anywhere, but I think for the most part, knowing that they have a plan and knowing that every match, every angle, every interview, there is a purpose for it, that to me keeps me invested because I at least think that it's going somewhere. Even if it doesn't turn out perfect, I at least feel like something is headed in the right direction.
Right. Every minute of AEW feels like essential programming, which is exciting when you're watching it. Building guys like Darby Allin up to the point that he is today. I mean, I had no reference for Darby
Right.
Allin when I first started watching AEW, and now he's become one of my favorite performers. And you mentioned people comparing WWE, specifically NXT, against AEW. It's not only fans doing that. WWE themselves did that, and that surprised me from the get-go. Right after the ratings of the first AEW versus NXT programming came out, WWE released that infamous statement saying something to the degree of this is a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah.
Even WWE has spoken on AEW, which surprised me.
Well, and I think too, and I brought up Raw and SmackDown, but obviously the biggest competition has been between those two because they're on the same night or have been for the most part, aside from
Right.
maybe switching back and forth here the past, I don't know, couple months or so now. But it does feel like, those are the two best each week. And I know there's a lot of people right now that are enjoying Impact and all sorts of other companies, but you think about it, and I do think NXT does a good job of just, that continuity with storylines and kind of having a purpose with where things are going. And it is a shame, that both of these are on the same night. And obviously there's been a lot of discussion about whether that eventually is the case and whether one moves, or obviously thinking that NXT could be the one that moves to potentially Tuesdays or something like that. But it's something where I think a lot of people wish they could watch both at the same time. But to see AEW, and we talk about all these positives that we've seen, and I think that's what's allowed them to keep this viewership that they have, because they do have that continuity week to week. They do have the stuff, I think, that sort of stands out for people. It almost has, even if you just look at the AEW Dynamite poster or the logo, it's very colorful. Like, there's just so many things, I think, that they do a good job of from a presentation standpoint to stand out. And the thing about it, Andy, is they're doing all this and really have for a large part of the past, whatever it's been, 7 months. They're doing all this within a pandemic and basically having to adjust on the fly so much now. We saw even the most recent example, here lately when the Lance Archer thing and they had to shuffle things around.
Right.
And, it's just, I think that's been impressive to me because, again, we're talking about a company that's been on television for 1 year. And I know there are people that have experience, but to be able to, I think, shuffle things around the way that they've had, that has been another impressive part of this.
Right, and I believe we've gotten to the point where there's been more shows in the pandemic era without the audience than there has been with the audience. So I feel like a large portion of that has just been the crop of stars that we've seen shine during this pandemic era, in addition to some of the new debuts that we've seen during this era. Without fans, we've seen the debuts of Broken Matt Hardy. Yeah. We've seen the debut of FTR. We've seen the debut of Brian Cage, and even more, I guess, unsuccessful situations like the debut of like Matt Cardona and things of that nature.
Yeah, no, we've seen a lot of people come in. Eddie Kingston. It's crazy to think about the Eddie Kingston thing where, he comes in and Cody's doing his open challenge thing, and Eddie Kingston just comes in and everybody was talking about that like as soon as it was over. And again, it wasn't necessarily just the match itself. It's just you've got a guy that comes in and he immediately connects with the audience. And I'm sure a lot of people knew who he was before, but it's just still, you bring him onto that spot, and I think they've done that with so many of these guys. Brian Cage, he comes right in. He wins the shot at the title right away. FTR's come in. They've won the tag titles. Like, they know how to bring people in and at least find a spot for them and be able to make it work and to be able to immediately connect them with their audience. For a lot of people, they probably knew a lot of these guys before they came to AEW, but I think they do such a good job of kind of throwing them right in and putting them in a spot to where even the people who didn't know them, like, they immediately connect with them. And I think that's been something that they've certainly done a good job with for sure. And I think one of the other things that Andy, people have talked about is think about all these people we're talking about. And the fact is, not once yet have we mentioned Kenny Omega.
Oh my gosh. It's a sin at this point that we haven't mentioned him. It's a cardinal sin in the wrestling world that we haven't mentioned.
It's just, but that to me, like, I think shows you kind of where things have been. And of course, he's been more of a tag team wrestler. And I think his usage has been a point of contention, I think, for some people. And of course, people like myself and many others I know who watched him do his thing in New Japan and saw all the great matches he had over there. And of course, we're talking singles matches. For him to be in this role that he's been as more of a tag team wrestler. And now, of course, recently, over the past several weeks, we're starting to see that change to where he's going to be in the tournament and all this other stuff. But, it has been different for a lot of people. But at the same time, and many people have brought this up, you think about the match that they had at Revolution. You think about kind of just this overall character arc, I guess, for him and Hangman Page. Right. And, you can argue that even though Kenny Omega really hasn't been much of a singles guy in this company throughout this entire 1 year run of Dynamite, he's still been one of the top guys, just in a different role. And I think that has maybe been something, because it's been so different and it's so different than what people are used to with him, maybe some are still just kind of waiting and saying, well, it hasn't really done that much for me. I still think the way they've done this entire tag team run with these two has still been pretty good. And I think now it's
Without
just,
question.
and it's just a matter of seeing where it goes from here, right?
Right. And see, I have a bit of a bone to pick within that controversy because I mean, I understand that people act like Kenny hasn't reached his full potential so far in AEW. And while that may be true, I mean, just look at some of the great singles matches that he's had in AEW's run already. His couple matches against Pac,
Yeah.
his match on Dark against Joey Janela, his match against John Moxley, for God's sakes, I mean, he has still stacked up some singles matches that have shown why he's the amazing worldwide star that he's become. But in addition to that, like the way that he and Hangman have hoisted up AEW's already amazing tag division. I mean, they're amongst teams like the Best Friends, like the Lucha Brothers, like the Young Bucks, and now FDR and Hangman and Kenny were hanging in there, right there with them, putting on bona fide tag team classics. It's genuinely incredible the versatility that this man has.
Well, that's what I was doing right now. Actually, you brought up kind of the tag teams and such, and my goodness, if you look at the tag team like division and the rankings, like you think about what they've done with their tag team division. And I know we're kind of all over the place here, but I think that kind of shows you like AEW has done to me, they've done a lot of things really well. You already have a loaded tag team division, but yet you're putting Kenny Omega and Hangman Page in there. Got two guys we know that as singles wrestlers, like they can be big stars, and obviously I think that's where we're headed now. Man, you look at this tag team division, you think about all these teams they brought in. Of course, the Young Bucks were the ones at the very start we knew were like, okay, let's think about all these potential matchups that the Young Bucks could have with all these teams. And now,
exactly.
You look around, man, and think about it, like, Best Friends. Like, think about how far that team has come and how much of a role they've played now. And, of course, we're talking, and I think we're probably going to bring this up in a little bit when we get to our favorite moments and favorite matches. But, I mean, you just point out, for them, Santana, Ortiz, the parking lot brawl that they had. I mean, that was something to me that was on another level. You even look at all these other teams, like the Lucha Bros, who were out there for a little while because of the pandemic. They were stuck. They weren't able to get back in, but now that they're back into the mix, Butcher and Blade, I mean, you go down the list, and this tag team division has just been incredible.
It shows itself whenever you're looking at the current rankings for the AEW tag division, and the Lucha Bros aren't even on there. I mean, that itself shows how stacked this division is. And you look at FTR and the potential that they have in matchups coming up. I mean, we have the Best Friends coming up here at the anniversary show. The Young Bucks, that matchup has been teased for literal years now. I mean, it speaks for itself.
Yeah, it does without question, and it's just, this division is unbelievable. But as we look elsewhere, I mean, we did mention Jurassic Express, like that's another team. It's just, man, there's so many different teams,
gosh,
right?
yeah.
It's a thing. Like sometimes you forget. You look at everything else. I mean, we think about some of the other stuff. I mean, I just kind of just brought it up, but obviously we were probably going to get to it at some point. I thought their recent addition, everybody kind of says, well, you watch this show each week, and sometimes it's hard to kind of pinpoint because you just watch so much. And you're like, well, how can I remember exactly maybe what happened 8 weeks ago or 14 weeks ago or 6 months ago?
Or even 1 week ago.
Exactly, even 1 week ago, especially in this year, right? In 2020, where it feels like it's been 5 years. But, I think back, though, and I brought it up, and I wrote a column for it on 411. And, I thought that episode that had the parking lot brawl with Best Friends and Santana Ortiz, I thought that was probably top to bottom the best episode, maybe. And again, this is the recency bias is always going to come into play here because can I tell you exactly what happened on the third edition of Dynamite? No, but I can tell you probably that edition was just unbelievable, and I think it was just capped off, as we said, by that parking lot brawl, which is, I mean, quite frankly, and I saw a lot of people say this, but it felt like unlike anything we had ever seen in AEW for sure. But like you just think about on wrestling television period in this era, it was so different. And I think it's still to this day, like it just stands out so much. And I just thought that overall episode was fantastic.
Well, and I believe even JR, who has been in the business for years upon years, came out and said that was the best match of that nature that he's seen. Speaking about that parking lot brawl, and when you stack that up against matches like I mean Eddie Guerrero and John Cena have had a parking lot brawl when John Cena was first coming up, potentially two of the greatest wrestling stars of all time, and to say that Santana and Ortiz versus the Best Friends in this parking lot brawl is better, I mean, it speaks volumes, and it just shows it just shows not only the creativity that these performers have, but the trust that AEW has in them in order to let them go out there and perform to that degree.
I think that's a good point, and you know, we were probably going to get to that at some point, but that is probably the best point in that it's not just necessarily, I think, the performers, it's AEW's handling of putting them in these positions, and we kind of touched on that earlier, but you know, again, to think about that, like Best Friends versus Santana Ortiz, if you love tag team wrestling, like you would expect that to be a good match, but like, would you expect that to be a match that completely just, you know, set the internet ablaze in terms of how it did? And, you know, that's because again, they put them in that position. I thought the build was great to it. And I just think that's something they've done really well here. And it hasn't been easy to do. Again, week to week, we know, like, putting on a television show each week is not easy to do. And it's certainly not easy to do within a pandemic, but yet they've been able to do that. Some of the other things I guess we could talk about in terms of, you know, the Dark Order. I mean, we talk about a lot of the stuff that AEW's done well. I mean, at the beginning, like that was one of the things that people were knocking, and we remember back, I mean, the Dark Order, the way it started, it was not something that necessarily was connecting with people. And, you know, we can remember back to those early weeks, and it was just not anything that kind of was, people were like, this is not a main event type of faction, and this is not one we want to see pushed down our throats each week. I think that's another situation where, you know, they bring in Brody Lee, they've made them such a bigger part of being the elite, and I think that's been an important aspect for them because they've kind of allowed them just to go full-on insane, and I think that's been a very good thing because it's allowed them to kind of showcase their personalities more, but that is one where you talk about, you know, maybe having to switch directions along the way. The Dark Order storyline is one that they kind of had no choice but to do that on because it really wasn't connecting with people.
And I feel like even though the Dark Order may not have been as well received near the beginning, like you said, once they switched it and added the intrigue of, oh, who is the leader? Who is the leader of this group? Is it Matt Hardy? Is it like you said? Is it Brody Lee? Is it Raven? And then having the big reveal and like you said earlier, the momentum that AEW puts behind these performers once they debut. It happened with Brian Cage and it happened with Brody Lee. And Brody Lee came in like a freight train, just tearing through the roster, just annihilating Cody, and then leading up to the amazing dog collar match that they had on this past edition of Dynamite. Just once again showing the brilliance of the creative that's happening right now.
They have, and you know, another I think point, and we talked about the Dark Order. You know, that was something at the beginning that wasn't necessarily getting a lot of praise. I still think, you know, if people look at it and they say, what are some of those spots in AEW that maybe need to improve, and what stands out on kind of the weekly television on Dynamite, you know, what are some of the areas they need to improve? I still think people are going to point towards the women's division and say that, you know, if you compare the AEW's women's division to, let's say, WWE, NXT, whatever, there's still a lot of people, I think, that feel like there's a lot to be desired with the AEW women's division. And I think it's one that, you know, to me, I mean, you don't have, like, Riho, she was such a big part of that early on, and obviously she hasn't been able to be there, as we know, because of restrictions and everything, but, you know, still, I mean, we did kind of talk about the evolution of Britt Baker. I mean, that's been a huge boost to this division without question. Of course, Hikaru Shida, she's been fantastic just in terms of the wrestling and what she's been able to do as champion. And then, of course, you know, Nyla Rose was kind of the one that started things off and kind of had the big push behind her. Big Swole, she's come along. I think Penelope Ford has a lot of potential. You see a lot of these other, you know, women's wrestlers. I mean, Anna Jay, I mean, she's become such a huge part of Dark Order. I mean, she's, you know, kind of one of the bigger stars of the group now. So
exactly,
it's just, I still think it's one, obviously, that there's room for improvement. We know that. But, you know, I also think that it's probably realistic to know that there are going to be some spots in the company that aren't as to the level as the others. When we talk about how incredible the tag team division is, we know the women's division isn't there yet, but I still think they're doing a pretty good job of trying to develop some of these women and at least get them to that point.
And I feel like a big degree of it is exposure.
Yeah.
I mean, WWE, like you said, they have an absolutely stacked women's division across all three rosters, whereas AEW is having to build these women from the ground up, basically. And now you have the infusion of stars like Abandon coming in and adding a bit of character flair into the women's division. You have monster behemoths like Nyla Rose, like Awesome Kong if she ever comes around again. Athletic specimens like Big Swole, and then like you said, growing characters like Britt Baker. I think the division is definitely on its way. It just needs a bit more exposure on the programming. I mean, look how often the tag team titles are defended. Look how often the TNT title is defended on television, and then put that up against the amount of defenses that the women's title has. Perhaps a bit more exposure, letting these characters breathe a bit more, can lead to a better reception of their women's division.
Two others that have been a big part of that, and for different reasons. Chris Statlander was obviously a big part from the beginning, but she's been out injured for the last little bit. And then I think Thunder Rosa has come in, and she's been such a huge boost. And obviously there's a different dynamic there because she is the NWA Women's Champion. It's just a matter of, okay, well, how much longer is she going to be with AEW? What's the next step for her? But I think she's given them a huge boost because her matches with Sheeta thus far, I think, have been really good. So they're headed in the right direction. I think it's trending up. It's just a matter of seeing, as you said, characters and just sort of the overall development of some of these, and we'll see how they do in getting there. I guess let's talk about, before we go to pick some of our favorite matches and moments, I mean, Moxley is champion. That's something we really haven't talked a lot about, but I think you never really know in terms of like a company like this that is newer. How long is a certain guy going to hold the top title, and could there be, could there be 3 or 4 different changes throughout the year? It hasn't really been the case with Moxley. I mean, since he won it from Jericho, as we know, I mean, he's been the man. He's taken on so many different people along the way. We talked about some of the most recent challenges against MJF, Brian Cage. What have you thought overall just of Moxley as a champion?
Yeah, see, the thing about Moxley is that I was always a fan of Dean Ambrose when he was doing his thing in WWE, but I wasn't always into the actual matches. I always loved his character work. His matches didn't always hold me, but his work in AEW against the likes of Kenny Omega, Pac, like we were Darby Allin, MJF, Eddie Kingston. I mean, you can name them all. There's just been an intensity there that I've absolutely gravitated towards, and this run as Jon Moxley has completely, I guess, how do I say it, reinvigorated my emotional investment in this wrestler, which sounds goofy, but it's true. I mean, he's proven to me why he's been the top guy across or at least one of the top guys across any company he's worked for. What have you thought of it?
Yeah, I think, and I don't remember who, Moxley I'm sure has brought this up, but I think I remember Jericho, because Jericho just does so much interview stuff. You're like, I always feel like I'm always recalling something that Jericho said. I'm like, this guy's just, he talks so much, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's just, he's just everywhere, right? So right. One of the things, escape him. No, and so one of the things he brought up was to think about, you think about where Moxley was when he left WWE. He's wearing that, whatever it was, that mask and all this other stuff, and just such a goofy, silly type of storylines he was doing there late in his WWE run. And then you think in kind of the difference in that and how he's come in and what he's been. And basically, I mean, he's essentially just been sort of an ass kicker. He hasn't really had to do anything else. Like, he's just had to come in, and that's been the approach they've taken with him. And I think it's worked. Right. I think that's something too with AEW. And I don't know if necessarily, I'm sure you'd have to think about it pretty deep to go into this, but I don't think they overcomplicate things. I think they sort of, and again, I think also we have to remember too, AEW and WWE are two different companies. They are different in their approaches. I think they have different intentions. One is a global entertainment company. The other is a worldwide, wrestling company. And I think that's the differences of that, how they promote it. I mean, we talk about it, Andy, like even just think about the rankings, like stuff like that. Like, they make it feel more of the sports-oriented type, and I think that's what's been different, and maybe that's why it's connected with people at such a large scale that it has.
And then let me pose you this question. Moxley as champ versus Jericho as champ. Which one have you preferred? Because we have two different styles of champion here. Possibly the more quote unquote entertaining champion. I would likely give that to Jericho, just with the amount of wiggle room that he has, and just the stuff that he does in general. Whereas Moxley, like you said, he's a bona fide badass. I would put him up against like 80s action stars.
Yeah.
He's going to walk in, he's going to clear the place, and he's going to walk out as a building explodes behind him.
Right.
Which championship run do you think you've gravitated towards more?
Well, I think it's, what is it? The old, of course, this is how WWE used to do it, but it's, it was always the methodology or always the thinking that you wanted the face to chase. Like you wanted them to be the ones that they're trying to sort of chase the title because that was where the money was at. And you wanted, to see a Jericho as kind of his character going up against, like we saw him going up against Jungle Boy and Darby Allin and all these others. But I also think Moxley as champ has been, to me, maybe even better just because, like, you've seen him go up against so many different types of guys along the way. Like, we remember, like, he had that little program to early in the pandemic with Jake Hager. We talk about the stuff that he's done with Brian Cage and then MJF, and they've all been different because you think about that. You think about the differences with the opponents. Like, the heels, I don't know what it is. Like, I just think they've all been such different challengers for him because, again, think about, like, Hager, MJF, Brian Cage, like they're all different characters. Like they're just so different in terms of what they bring. I think that's been something to me just to watch those. And we can even say the same coming up here with this Lance Archer thing because he has Jake Roberts behind him and all that. I think to me that's been really fascinating because you have Moxley that has to basically go up against all these different challengers, but yet they're all really different in terms of their approach. And I think that's what made the matches really unique to me.
Right, and I feel like the thing that sets it apart there are the clearly defined characters that they're working with. Like you said, Brian Cage, we knew who he was right when he entered the scene, right when he teamed up with what do they call themselves? The Taz Squad, Team Taz. Right when he teamed up with Team Taz, you knew who he was. Right when Lance Archer came in and he had Jake Roberts behind him, Lance Archer in the background throwing people through ceilings as Jake Roberts gives a monologue. MJF, the character work he does with the MJF 2020 campaign. All of these characters going right up against Moxley. It just makes sense, and that's what's wonderful about it.
Something else AEW's done, and I think we noticed this specifically, they have done a good job of bringing those guys like Taz and Jake Roberts and Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard. And because, look, these are people that, I think there's a certain aspect of that audience. They can connect with those guys. And if these are people that have dropped off from watching wrestling because they don't like WWE now or they don't like this or don't like that, bringing back those guys, I think, and making them such a huge part of Dynamite over this past year, that's been really important too. I mean, even recently, we've seen Vicky Guerrero come back, and like there's a segment of the audience somewhere that connects with those people because they're like, oh yeah, I remember watching Jake Roberts or Arn Anderson or Taz on commentary at WWE or Taz in ECW wrestling or whatever. And I think that's something very smart. I think, obviously in WWE it's so different now because they don't really use managers to that aspect. I mean, what do we think? We think about Paul Heyman and like that's about it, right? We don't really take on that a whole lot.
Right.
But
even Zelina Vega's gone now.
Yes, exactly. Like even she's not in that role. She's a wrestler now. So I think because they've done that, and it's not just like they're not just bringing in anyone. They're bringing in guys that people know, and it's like, oh, well, we can promote that Jake Roberts is here now, or we can promote, that Arn Anderson is here with Cody or whatever. Because these are guys that they can learn from, right? And that's why I think AEW, they brought in guys like that to where these are all rising talents still for the most part. And to have them surrounded by these guys that know the business so well, that's been another important aspect, I think, of their development.
Oh yeah, and more importantly, I think that they bring an air of legitimacy to the programming because I feel like a lot of times, I guess more judgmental people come into watching AEW programming and they see people flip around that are potentially smaller than themselves from time to time. But if you have someone like like Jake Roberts come and lend his name to a superstar. Of course, Lance Archer doesn't need anybody to make him look intimidating because he's Lance Archer, but Jake Roberts just makes him that much better. If you have Arn Anderson come in and lend his name to somebody like Cody, it just cements him even further as the legitimate star that he is.
Yeah, it's for sure. And I think that's been another big aspect of just, keeping that viewership, growing that viewership, has been just having guys that, people can connect with past and present. And they've been able to do that with all these guys for sure. But all right, Andy, that brings us to the fun part where we get to kind of pick some of our favorite moments, favorite matches. And like I said, it's not easy to do this because, like I mentioned earlier, like it feels like 2020 with everything going on. It feels like it's been 5 years since 2019. But,
Right.
it's hard to keep up with everything. And because we know the situation and circumstances have been different, maybe there are certain things that stand out for others. But let's start with this. What are some of your favorite matches from this 1 year run of Dynamite, or ones that maybe stand out the most to you?
Oh gosh. Okay, so I come from I know you come from more of a sports background and sports writing and whatnot. I come more so from a entertainment background
Right.
background in theater and whatnot. So the emotional investment that I felt in Cody Rhodes versus Dustin Rhodes at Double or Nothing, or even Kenny Omega and Hangman versus the Young Bucks at Revolution. The emotion that those matches packed was just incredible for me. It was as if you're watching a Greek tragedy on screen as you're watching these amazing physical athletic performances in real time as well. So when it comes to my favorite matches, I think I would have to stick with that amazing tag match at Revolution between the Bucks and then Kenny and Hangman, and then also that first taste that we had with Cody Rhodes versus Dustin Rhodes, and then that amazing speech that Cody had in ring following that match. Wrestling doesn't get better than that for me.
Yeah, no, and that's what you said. I mean, that storytelling aspect is so important, and we've heard wrestlers talk about that all the time. Like, it's not just a matter of, and this is sort of that old school, new school thing where sometimes you get that back and forth jabbing and everything, but like you need both. Like you need that
Exactly.
story, right? You can't just have one or the other.
And I see people rag on the Young Bucks constantly, saying all that they do is flip around. All that they do is super kick, super kick, super kick. Which, I mean, it just seems ridiculous to me that somebody can watch a match like that Revolution tag team match and not see the value that these men bring to not only this show but the wrestling world in general.
I think you just again, it's one of those where you just the more you watch it, like you pick up on something new. I think every time you do, and I think it adds that layer of stories because all these guys, like it's not just they don't tell their entire career story in one match or one angle. It's just if you follow and you see kind of how they progress. I think that's such a huge part of it. And like I said, I mean, I think back to that even the most recent, and I know recency bias plays a role, but that parking lot brawl, the presentation was unlike anything we've seen.
My
I mean,
gosh, yeah.
it was so different, and I think the same. Honestly, we talked about earlier. You said the same for the Stadium Stampede, and I know there were some people on the far one side that absolutely hated it. There were others on the other side that absolutely loved it. I was one that just loved it because I did not
Oh
going
yeah.
in expecting it to be a wrestling match. Like you said, you went in knowing that it's a story and it's entertainment, right? And that's what that match was supposed to be, and I thought it delivered completely.
Well, and that's the thing. Like any expectations, like set them aside. If you go into an AEW show, you're going to be entertained in one way or the other. They have everything for you. Like
Yeah.
if you love the, I guess, the cruiserweight style of wrestling with the Hurricane Ranas and the rotating double flip arm drags and whatever you're looking for, they're going to have that for you in droves, and they're going to be the best in the world at it. But then you also have this amazing character work on the other side of it that is just undeniable.
No, I completely agree, and those have certainly been some of the best matches. And I think if you look at some of the best moments, and I'm actually going to take to Twitter here and read some of the responses we got on Twitter for some people. I put out something basically saying, hey, send in your favorite moments or matches from this past year or so in AEW, and we'll talk about it on the show. Shining Wizards Wrestling Podcast, we will give them some love. They obviously the very first show, the birth of the Inner Circle, the first no-fan COVID show, which that was one that stood out. Such a unique feel to that for sure.
Oh, yes.
Brings up the Thanksgiving Eve show, Jericho versus Scorpio Sky, both nights of Fyter Fest. Yes, Bash at the Beach. You think about it like that. We're going to talk about that in a second. I completely forgot to bring that up. FTR's debut, Matt Hardy's debut, the TNT Open challenges, and then Eddie Kingston versus Cody Rhodes. So that's from Shining Wizards Wrestling Podcast. Let's go ahead and just jump through a couple of these others, and then we'll hit on some of the highlights. On Deck IC response was the boat, and there you go, the boat, and that. And he also said that Revolution was a literal perfect pay-per-view, as we brought up. Badger Estrada, he writes in and says Orange Cassidy showing up in random places, and the match with Pac. So Orange Cassidy, I feel like we didn't even talked a lot about Orange Cassidy. We'll get to that in a second. All right, I'm going to read our last one here. This is from AEW Dub on Twitter. A great resource, by the way, for AEW people if you want to follow at AEW Dub. Pac versus Orange Cassidy, Cody versus Dustin, which we just talked about. Young Bucks versus Omega and Hangman, greatest tag team match in the last 10 years. Also brings up the Parking Lot Brawl, Best Friends versus Santana and Ortiz. Pac versus Omega, the 30-minute Iron Man match. That's another one you kind of forget about, but that was really good too.
Wow.
Hangman versus Jericho at All Out. Yes. Young Bucks versus Lucha Bros ladder match. Yes, that's another one. Like, think about that. Think about all those moments I just read off from four people sent that in, and like we didn't even touch on half of that.
I just feel such a sense of personal shame that we've left out Orange Cassidy to such a degree so far.
Andy, I ordered his shirt on the AEW shop. I ordered the orange, freshly squeezed shirt, so I might wear that on our first episode if it gets here.
See, I ordered the one with his headshot, so maybe we can be matching. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah, but like, think about it. We didn't bring him up, and like, he's been such a huge part of it too.
Oh my gosh! And if we're talking about our favorite moments, Orange Cassidy's whole run, like his breakout run versus Jericho, any of those segments, you can throw them into my favorite moments, because you would never think that a character like Orange Cassidy would work without like fan reaction, but he has such a strong sense of character, and he is presented in such a smart way to that he can go out there with nobody in the crowds at all, and I still feel like I hear a crowd of laughter around me. You know what I mean?
Yes, and that's the thing is people kept saying, he's someone, man, with no crowds. Like, what are you going to do with Orange Cassidy? Like, what's he going to be able to do? And I mean, you've noticed the difference in terms of just the audible sound because you don't have a full crowd of 20,000 people cheering, but I haven't really noticed much of a difference, like, because they've really found a way to keep him involved. And obviously, as you just said, with the Jericho thing, like, that's brought him to another level now because he's not just a guy, maybe even he was a year ago when AEW Dynamite started. Like, he's a completely different person now, but yet he still has all of those different elements that make him such a lovable character to so many people.
Right. And now if the last episode of Dynamite means anything, it looks like he's next up for Cody Rhodes as well, which that's an interaction that I have never even considered before. So I'm excited to see what they can do together, because to me, Cody is a very classic style of wrestling, whereas Orange Cassidy, who knows what he can do in the ring? I mean, we haven't even seen a drop of orange juice worth of what he can do in the ring, I feel, so far.
No, I agree, and that's that. You just brought it up, but like, you think about so many different matchups that you don't even necessarily. I think because we're conditioned maybe to that face versus heel for so long, but like in AEW, I think you can do so many things to where it really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's because I don't know what it is. Like, there's something about it, and I probably, the more I think about it, I can probably have a better explanation, but I just feel like, matches like that where it really doesn't matter if they're, someone the crowd cheers, the crowd boos, you can put them together and it's probably going to work at some point.
And there's an unpredictable element to it as well that is just really attractive. You go into those matches and and you don't have a format in your mind that this match could possibly follow, and it just opens up a world of possibility for the performance, I feel like.
All right, three quick things, Andy, and then we're going to wrap up and promote the Dissecting Dynamite show. We're going to do a little quick rapid fire here. We
All right,
we
sounds good.
we may have answered this earlier, but we're going to say it again because I don't remember if we exactly were both on the same page on this. But the MVP of AEW through 1 year of Dynamite is.
Oh, I have to agree, Chris Jericho. If you're on the same page, you better be on the same page. I don't know who wouldn't be.
Yes, I am going to pick Jericho too with that. I kind of made my reasoning for that earlier, but a lot of worthy candidates. But I just think he's the overwhelming one for me that has kind of stood out the most in this 1 year run. All right, we talked about a lot of positive things, and we've talked about some areas of improvement. So that's this question. The one thing you would really like to see AEW improve in 1 year from now, when we're talking about the 2 year anniversary of what's the biggest area you think they can make the biggest jump in?
I want us to be able to speak about the quality of characters in the women division as well as we have for the men's division today. Just because I feel like we said, the potential is there, and we've seen some injections of spirit into that area with Britt Baker, with Beta, and even like you said, Anna Jay, things of that nature. But I feel like there could be so much more. So a year from now, I'm hoping that the women's division is something that we are just raving about.
I agree. I would say that too, because as we said, there's a lot of people that seem to be kind of in that mix now, and they're moving on the way up. And I think AEW Dark, which for me, I review the show every week for 411, and getting to see some of these younger women's wrestlers that they're bringing in from, the indies and such, and kind of seeing how they mix, and like, oh, well, you look at this one, you're like, all right, that one's probably going to have a chance. Like Red Velvet, she's one that's been on AEW Dark, most recent episode, she was basically saving Brandy Rhodes, so that means they obviously have some plans for her. So yeah, seeing ones like that, Penelope Ford, Thunder Rosa, if she's still there and kind of doing her thing, I'd love to see her there full time with them, all those different ones. And so I agree with you on that. The thing that you're most excited about here after 1 year of AEW Dynamite for AEW, what's the thing that you're most excited about here moving forward?
Oh gosh. Okay. So for me, it's probably these young stars that we've seen been built up over the past year, the MJFs, the Darby Allens, the Sammys of the world, just seeing the heights that they're going to reach, because I feel like there really truly is not a ceiling for some of these guys. The potential is limitless, and I think within the next year we are really going to see them put a broader load of the show on top of their shoulders, and carry us into the future.
All right, I lied. I got one more, but I just thought of this one in my head, and I think it's really good. So when we do our 2 year AEW Dynamite anniversary show, who is going to be the AEW World Champion?
Oh my gosh. We've talked about it a bit. We've talked about how maybe he hasn't reached his full potential so far, but I'm putting it on the record today. A year from now, we are going to be looking at AEW World Champion Kenny Omega.
That's exactly who I was going to say. So there you go. We're on the same page there. That is the one when I thought of the question, I was like, I think that's who I'm going to pick, because I feel like this is a direction we may be going in, and we will see if that's exactly what happens. But Andy, this has been a ton of fun, man. We obviously brought up a lot from 1 year of AEW Dynamite, but as we said, we're not done, because you are officially launching the Dissecting Dynamite show for 411, and we're going to have that first episode coming up after the anniversary show next Wednesday night, and we'll have the links to everything in the show notes. But for now, Andy, let people know what they can expect and what they can get ready for here with the Dissecting Dynamite.
Yeah, if you want to hear us talk about Dynamite even more, if you want to hear our thoughts on AEW even more, then make sure that you're watching Dissecting Dynamite. That's 411 Mania's new live AEW Dynamite post-show breakdown. We're going to be live every single Wednesday on 411 Mania's YouTube channel directly following the end of Dynamite. So make sure you are watching. Make sure you're in that chat giving us your thoughts on the show because we love to hear them.
Yep, we'll put the link to that in there, and yes, it will be live after AEW Dynamite. So come join the show. It's going to be a lot of fun. I know we're excited to do the first episode. We are really excited to do this because again, we know there are a lot of AEW fans out there, and rather than just talk about it on Twitter, which you can still do, you can come watch live as well and comment and do all the good stuff there when we talk about AEW Dynamite. But Andy, this was a lot of fun, and we will get ready to do it all over again on Wednesday night.
All right, I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks again to Andy Perez for joining me here on the 411 on Wrestling podcast to discuss all things AEW and the upcoming Dissecting Dynamite show, which we are very excited to get launched on Wednesday night. So remember, we'll have all the links to everything you need in the show notes to 411 Mania's YouTube channel. Subscribe there and come on in, join the fun, join the conversation right after Dynamite on Wednesday night, because we would love to hear your comments. We'd love to hear your feedback on the show, and we will talk about the entire show and give our thoughts on what we thought about the 1-year anniversary episode of AEW Dynamite. And as I continue to mention on the podcast, the GoFundMe link for Larry Zonka's family will continue to include that in the show notes. So continue to share that. We thank you for that, and continue to spread the word so that it can reach more people. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast. Any podcast app that you use, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, all of them. Just search for 411 on Wrestling, and you'll find it there, and you can subscribe for free. And if you enjoy the podcast, take a few seconds, leave us a nice 5-star rating or review. That way, we can have more wrestling fans joining the fun here on the 411 on Wrestling podcast. But for everything else, 411mania.com, you can check out all of our written reviews over there. Of course, the G1, almost to its conclusion for the 30th edition of the G1 Climax. Ian Hamilton has all his reviews going up at 411mania.com. So if you're still catching up on them, or if you're not able to watch every show, you want a great insight into what you've missed, Ian Hamilton's reviews over at 411mania.com. And we have our weekly television reviews up, Raw, SmackDown, NXT, AEW Dynamite. Of course, my AEW Dark review up each and every week on Tuesday nights. You can check all that out at 411mania.com for all your wrestling needs. And again, thank you as always for listening to the podcast, and stay safe, and we'll talk to you next time here on the 411 on Wrestling podcast.